Greetings, this is Peg Brady, NOAA Fisheries. This is the February edition of our monthly EAFM seminar series here at NOAA Fisheries. We're based here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And today we have a speaker from our international office, Michael Abbey, who will be speaking about supporting the implementation of ecosystem approaches to fisheries management in Southeast Asia, curriculum development and training. And this is, as I say, a monthly series we have here. And I just thought I'd make a note that next month, March, we're going to take a break and resume the series in April, on April 12th. And we'll have Dr. Heather Leslie, who's the director of the Darling Center at the University of Maine. So we'll be looking forward to seeing or hearing from Heather in April. So stay tuned for our April session. And I want to welcome Michael to our lecture today, and we'll turn it over to him. He's here actually in Silver Spring, and contrary to some of our other speakers who are joining us from all over the map, but Michael is here in the room in Silver Spring, Maryland. So thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience that I've had with working in Southeast Asia on curriculum development in particular. It's a skill I didn't enter this experience with, but one I have a little bit now, and working on development and training on the implementation of EAFM, the ecosystem approach to fisheries management. These are the things I hope to cover. Those that know me know I can speak a lot, and I probably will only get to the first one, but I will do my best. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Southeast Asia in general, about why we're there. Essentially, EAFM is the name of the curriculum we developed. Examples from that curriculum, and I'm not going to dig deep into it. I just kind of want to show you kind of a survey of some of the topics and approaches we took to it. Key contribution, one of the things that we did in a recent revision is add the flexibility of case studies, and I'll go into that. And what we're struggling with a little bit now is this transition from theory, which is essentially EAFM, to the applied. Most of the work was funded by USAID over a period of 10 years. We haven't been working on EAFM over 10 years, but the relationship that we've had between NOAA and USAID has covered the marine environment both at a national level for the first 5 years. That was from 2009 to 2014, and at a regional level and also a national level from 2014 to 2020. So we are ending the second 5-year PAPA, the Participating Agency Partnership Agreement with USAID. The first 5 years was a subset of the countries you see here, the ASEAN countries. It was Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands. The second 5-year plan was actually excluding the Pacific 3 and focused on the region, ASEAN region, and I'll go into a little bit as to why that happened. So we've had about 10 years of working under USAID funding. NOAA supported a lot of that through our own funding as well, time and effort. But USAID, while they provided the funding and some of the in-country support, it was really NOAA that provided the expertise. And from Silver Spring, not so many folks, but we worked with, at least on the EAFM, I worked with the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program, which no longer exists in Hawaii, and that was led by Rusty Brainerd. We do have people from NOS who actually lead the agreement we have with USAID, and they provide training and other areas. And I appreciate my office as well, giving me the last 10 years of a great job to work in Southeast Asia on something that I'm passionate about and something that we've seen real change happening because of our consistent effort. The last 5 years have really been driven by their attempt at applying electronic catch documentation and traceability. And the reason that USAID started working on that is because of our own SIMP program. So that has been kind of the lead called the Oceans and Fisheries Partnership, which is a contractor, Tetra Tech, who manages kind of the interface. NOAA comes in as the technical partner. We do some of our own training. We work with the Oceans and Fisheries Partnership. It's all coordinated by USAID Asia. So one of the things that the two major programs under the Oceans and Fisheries Partnership are EAFM and port state measures. So you have Office of Law Enforcement heavily engaged in the area too. From 2014, we've been focused generally for the first couple of years on working with CEPDEC, but for the last, and that's the Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center based in Thailand, but essentially representing all the countries in the region. They're the R&D shop for the region. Some of the countries like the Philippines have the capability to do a lot of the research themselves, but certain countries like Cambodia and even Laos, which is landlocked, don't. And so CEPDEC is a partner for them. And I decided in 2018 to make it a partner for me, as I kind of knew that the time was running out on our ability to institutionalize the work. I needed to find a partner. And we were kind of working with them on the catch documentation traceability. Anyways, they have an EAFM team. And so a lot of the work that I'm going to show you is actually us building their capacity to deliver EAFM in the region. The reality is we can't be there all the time. You know, I might be there twice a year. These folks train, that's their job. They're a training part of a fisheries organization. The Japanese are a pretty big partner, which drives often a lot of their focus, but they've been a really good partner for us. Some of the challenges, of course, is, you know, they're not coming from maybe even fisheries backgrounds. And I think that's actually been helpful for us to start from a very basic level when we do our presentations and our curriculum. Why? Because not only we don't know who our trainers are, but we don't know who the audience is. And a lot of these have to be translated. And so when you're talking about complicated words like, what does human well-being mean? How do you translate that into Thai or Cambodian? You know, how do you translate those into different languages? It's actually quite a challenge. So over the last 7 years, and I think we really started working on this in about 2012, we meaning FAO, Bob-Lamy, Bay of Bengal Large Marine Ecosystem, and NOAA, all of us kind of were attempting to think about how do we teach EAFM in the region independently. And it was a conversation in about 2012 where we all realized that we're all trying to get to the same idea. Develop a curriculum to amplify the use of EAFM in the region. Of course, the challenge was none of us are experts in curriculum. We all have fisheries backgrounds. But coming together, we started to play around with this idea of what do you teach? How do you teach it? And we brought in select people from the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia to help us kind of ground truth our approaches and also make sure that we're localizing it. And one of the challenges that we have in the region is most of the people are using science from the West. It's not appropriate, the terms are there, they have a challenging time actually implementing it in their own countries. So the 4 phases are, you know, this is 2012. We started regional and national training probably in about 2014. Mainstreaming is a Philippine term, but applying EAFM probably only in the last 6 months. And what we're trying to work on now is applying those concept tools and skills through our last 5 years of actually on the ground teaching into mainstreaming. And so we're modifying how we think about the principles, startup planning, implementing, and monitoring and evaluation. In some of these areas, we have lots of great experience. We've had success. We've had a lot of failures in especially monitoring and evaluation. So those have all kind of worked themselves into a revision of the Essential EAFM, which is the theory course, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here. And I will give you some examples of how we've approached the implementing. And that's kind of where much of the region is right now, is struggling with, we got people trained, now what? I'm just going to zip through this all and I'll walk through it. So this is kind of a schematic of how we, over the last 7 years, on how we started. And curriculum development, that took a couple of years, regional training, national training. Oftentimes we approach this, the regional training and the national training simultaneously. One of the reasons is finances. Regional trainings are really expensive. It's not something we could do. Even USAID was a little bit reluctant to fund regional trainings where you're bringing people in, but they did. National training, we tended to focus our work in the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Timor-Leste. Out of those original countries I talked to you about in the Coral Triangle Initiative, the 2009 to 2014. I'll get into these boxes in a bit. But there were different levels, different scales of training, different types of personnel. With the national training, we had a little bit more control over who might attend. With regional trainings, it was a crapshoot because they were invited. We really had no control over who would attend. And that made it both, I think, in a way, a positive challenge because we had to, again, take a step back and be very basic. We didn't know if it was a political, we didn't know if it was a career, someone that had a background in fisheries, or someone that had a background in just, fine arts. We didn't know, but we were given the hand, we had the hand we were dealt. And I think that actually strengthened our training because we were able to, again, think about what is the basic things people need to know. And that's what took about 2 years to get this curriculum up and running, was the fact that we came forward, all of us have fisheries degrees, we wrote it like we learned at whatever university we went to. That's not the reality in the region. And I think this has been a very good lesson for us as we start to work in the Pacific and in South America, that we're taking that step back and saying, what is the basic level of information people need to know to implement this successfully? And again, I would say this is within the last year, 6 months to a year, thinking about case studies, flexibility in case studies, and mainstreaming. And that's kind of that, okay, now you have the theory, how do you apply it? What do you do? I'm going to get in just at the overall packaging of Essential EAFM. We call it a toolkit, and highlight some of the ideas that permeate the curriculum before I get into some examples of the curriculum. And the toolkit is a very important word here. I say CFTEC version because that's the version that we actually revised. We're calling it the CFTEC version to separate it from the original Essential EAFM, which we want to leave on the website on eafmlearn.org. CFTEC is doing a lot of the training. They had some particular experience. One of the things they didn't have was a partnership with us when we actually wrote this. And so, you had people who are training on something that they weren't a part of in the development. So they would skip sections saying, I don't understand. Why do you guys use this example? Why are you using this terminology? We'll just skip it. So what we did was we spent the last year rewriting about 300 slides, the Essential EAFM and all of the materials to make it their own. This is now the CFTEC version. And that's the appropriate way for us to think about it, is they're the ones who are going out and doing the training. This is the toolkit. So it's not just revising the PowerPoints. Whenever we revise a slide, we have to go through all of these documents to make sure everything maps back to the PowerPoint. That's a lot of work, and it's tedious, but I think it's really important. And one of the reasons is that we have no control as the people who develop this over how this is used, where it is used, when it is used, and by whom. And that was purposeful, because what we want is that we want people at every level, every scale, to basically say, I'm interested in EAFM, I'd like to learn more about it. They can, it's a zip file, download everything. This essentially makes up a 5 to 6 day course. The Essential EAFM is a full 10-hour a day, 5-day course at a minimum. And if you need to parse things out because of a country's experience or lack of experience, you know, that can add a day or two, or it requires you to come back and, you know, focus on stakeholders. You know, what is a stakeholder, for example? It's not obvious in many of the countries that we work in. So as I mentioned, in 2018, I approached CFDEC to say, I'd like to institutionalize this with you. They're the logical partner. And we've worked for the last year to say, well, what does that mean? What does institutionalization of EAFM mean? And that was learning about how they're approached, how they use the training, and also learning about the countries themselves. And Laos, PDR is landlocked, but they're getting EAFM training. Why? Well, there's a very big fishery that's inland, freshwater. So how are they adapting something that was kind of focused on marine to an inland environment? That's actually quite educational for us, and it showed the width and breadth of people that are being trained. CFDEC is focusing on Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar as trying to catch them up to the rest of the region. The Philippines, pretty advanced. Malaysia, in parts, advanced. You know, so what they're trying to do, CFDEC is trying to kind of create a balance of understanding throughout the region. Why? Because CFDEC is a regional training organization, and when they come in and want to talk about combating IUU or seafood fraud, or they want to talk about port state measures, they want to have people that have a common understanding. And so this Essential EAFM, by focusing on those 4 countries, is kind of helping the weaker links be able to talk to, cooperate with, and actually influence decisions that the region takes. And I think that's pretty important. So my commitment to USAID was to revise the Essential EAFM to make a CFDEC version, and also come up with a case studies manual. And I'll kind of go over that case studies manual in a bit. 5 steps of EAFM. In our training, ad nauseum, we constantly bring up this graph. And the reason is we want people to think about the phases: plan, do, check and improve, and the steps. And so we introduce this not as a complete circle in the beginning. We kind of walk through each of the phases and each of the steps as we proceed along in the modules. It's something that you can apply anywhere, right? I mean, it's a company, a training course, managing your resources. It's just something that people understand. And so we thought about different designs. Is it a triangle? Is it a square? And we keep coming back to trying to do something that looks like this. Again, that permeates all of our trainings too. Just, you know, linking policy to action. The reality is, in many of the countries we work in, Vietnam's a great example. In 2012, they took out a World Bank loan, and the requirement was to decentralize fisheries management. They essentially on Friday night turned off the lights in the central government, and on Monday morning there was a fax sitting in the provinces saying, you're in charge. And for a lot of these countries, the people at the provincial and local level basically took orders from the central government, implement X, Y, or Z, and they did it. Throughout the region now, fisheries management is decentralized, and that has kind of added the impetus to do this kind of work, to be able to train bureaucrats at different levels on actually how to manage fisheries. how to think about managing fisheries, how to think about collecting the data, doing science. In some of these countries, they never had to do that before. Philippines, an example of, kind of very similar to the US in many ways. But in most of the other countries, they haven't had that experience of managing on the ground. Everything was done by the central government, sent down. Now, pretty much all the countries are decentralized, and which requires training of the bureaucrats to be able to implement those policies that are being sent down. And so they need to choose how to localize those policies that's appropriate for their region. This is a slide that was put together by Roland Geronimo, a Philippine scientist that worked at NOAA for a very short time. I really like how he's attempting to bring in the science part of it, which again, in countries that have, again, I'll go back to Vietnam, they had a 5-year plan, increase production by 2% every year. That was the plan, and so you went from countries that had these production-driven plans to now considering how does conservation play into this? And again, the people that we work with at the provincial and local level often don't have a fisheries background. They took a test, they were placed into fisheries because of a score on the test. Now they're managing fisheries. And it's kind of easy to walk away, but on the other hand, it's also a great opportunity to kind of get back to basics about what is it about fisheries management that we can teach, and what is it about their experience that can help us improve the way that we engage with our colleagues here in the United States or in the Pacific Islands. The EAFM plan, this essentially is the steps that we walk through in essential EAFM. FMU is Fisheries Management Unit. Terminology has been a real challenge for us. What is it? How do we call a fisheries manager? Is it fisheries management area, fisheries management unit? We've been struggling a lot still with that. But one of the things that we work on, and this is a workbook, I'll pass this around, but as we go through the 5-day training, they fill out this workbook, stage by stage. What they don't know is that this workbook is actually a fisheries management plan. It's a basic one, but by the end of the week, we say, well, you just actually wrote a fisheries management plan. And that is kind of an epiphany for some and a new experience for most. But we have set up the curriculum to take step by step following those that would mimic a fisheries management plan. Very generalized one, but if you want to take a look at this, David, can I pass it to you? What's that? That's actually in the toolkit. So when you go to eafmlearn.org, and we'll cover that in a little bit, this is all part of the toolkit. But that's how we tried to do this, is kind of in a way to give people the experience or at least an understanding of what makes up a fisheries management plan, and they'll apply it in their area however they can. So what are the courses that are available on the eafmlearn.org? And actually I have a handout there. There's about 20 copies. That's just a PDF of what I kind of took a snapshot of eafmlearn.org. That is a website that we set up a long time ago. I'm trying to convince CFTech to manage it. Right now it's managed by a really excellent consulting group out of London that does natural resource training, IMA and Associates. We have 4 main toolkits and the focal areas. NOAA led the development of the first 3. The inland EAFM, just came online, and that was a demand. That was a demand by the region because if you have Laos, you have Cambodia, you have significant inland fisheries that take the same general idea of essential EAFM, that theory course, but specialize it, focus it a little bit on inland fisheries. This one is Leaders, Executives, and Decision Makers Lead Toolkit. What is that one? What we found out after we started implementing EAFM is a lot of the people we were training, mid-level bureaucrats, were coming back and saying, this is great, but my boss doesn't understand what I do or why I want money to implement EAFM. So we created a toolkit that basically addresses that question. We have developed a half a day, a full day, and a 2-day curriculum, plug and play. It has everything from speaker's notes to PowerPoints to hot topics to Q&A to 20-second elevator speeches. And basically the target is those decision makers, the people who held the budget strings, to convince them that EAFM is something that we need to invest in. And so it's not a full course. It's not going to get people to be able to apply EAFM. It's a targeted course that actually helps managers understand what it is, why it's important, and helps them understand why and what needs to be funded. So that came out of the region. The region said, hey, we need some help in addressing our leaders. They don't understand. The Train the Trainers course is it's not focused on EAFM in particular. It's how do you train? Because again, a lot of the people that are teaching this course may not have participated in a formal training. They just downloaded it. We do work a lot with CFDEC on how do you set up a room? How do you read your audience? How do you deal with questions that you don't know the answer to? Those kind of things. I didn't know that either. So this was kind of a course that we implement. Typically the way that it works in the region is CFDEC, for example, will train 50 people in Cambodia. They'll choose 7 or 8. They'll go back again and do a very focused training on those 7 or 8 to be leaders, champions in the region on EAFM. That's what I just showed you. It's free. It's a great resource. We're trying to keep it updated. We just need to find someone to manage it. So hopefully it won't die. But that is where we keep all of the toolkits. There's a lot of other additional resources there, and I encourage you to use it. It's been a great tool for us to reach out. At one time we had a talkback forum, and that just, again, you need somebody to full-time focus on managing such a thing. Oops, sorry. As of now, about 1,000 people have been trained in the region. Those directly from NOAA, those by FAO, those by Bob Lamy, and those by CFDEC. That's a significant amount of people that now have a basic understanding, if not a more full understanding, of how to apply EAFM. We've moved into South Asia a little bit. People from Africa have come to Southeast Asia, and the work has been translated into Spanish and has been used in the Caribbean. And of course, now with the updated version, we'll have to go through that, and those who choose to do it will have to go back and translate. It's not money that we have to do it ourselves. It tends to be an organization that will take that on. We have a cadre of trainers in each country. Those are the people we keep inviting back. Those are the people that we interface with. We can't interface with local or provincial or even national level staff who've been trained. We need to kind of choose with whom we interact just because we don't have the time. But we learn a lot from them, and they've been key into updating the presentation. Lots of experiences that they can share. Some application, the Philippines have been trying to mainstream this and have encountered some really interesting challenges and successes. We kind of paired CFDEC with the Philippines to be able to learn from that, and then CFDEC can therefore go out and work with the countries they do to share those experiences. And we have some case studies demonstrating applying EAFM. There's no case study that says, hey, we applied EAFM and these are the outcomes, but we have scales of it. One of the challenges that we had with the old presentation or the old EAFM was that the case studies were locked. You had Hawaii, you had some case studies. We don't recall why we chose them as case studies. And so what we've decided to do with the new case studies, was actually to give them the flexibility to choose from a manual to pick the best case study that works for them. Yeah, kind of covered that. So we have some local language versions, Thai, an online version in Spanish, and an inland version which just came up. Again, that's another example of how we've kind of approached this curriculum development, is assuming people are going to download this, use it on their own, and there's going to be no control, and that's okay. We really want this to be expanded as much as possible. All right, so going to dig in a little bit, a couple of slides. One of the things that we frequently do is, again, noting what I just said, we do a lot of activities. We always put them in yellow. That's assigned to the trainer and to the student that they got to get up and do something. And so these activities, along with the significant amount of mapping, make up a lot of the learning that goes on in the course, and it facilitates the instruction. One of the challenges, of course, is language. And in some cases, we work in communities where there's a lot of illiteracy. You know, so how do you do a training when you can't have, you don't understand, or people can't read the slide? So we've tried to do a lot of graphics. We try to do a lot of mapping. We try to do a lot of activities where reading such a thing, or just by listening, they can carry it out for themselves. Okay, realizing that broader management approach is required to address the many threats. You know, one of the things we do is we talk about what is the ecosystem approach and realize how ecosystems benefit humans. We talk a lot about the, just generally, we call it the ecosystem approach, EA, and some of the benefits. Just highlighting many of the activities that you see, the bigger picture. Of course, just like NOAA, one of the challenges that all these countries have is they're not responsible for oil and gas development. They may not be responsible for what happens in the upland, but they need to understand how those impacts, how those activities impact their area of responsibility. And so, for example, in Vietnam, they use marine spatial planning. It's EAFM, but it's on the ecosystem approach. Different names, but generally everybody's trying to get to the same point, is balancing conservation with production. Teaching people what EAFM is. A lot of the experience in the region is that they have FADs, right? In the 70s and 80s, everybody was talking about MPAs. And so you have people in the region who think MPA is fisheries management. It's not, it's a tool. But that was their exposure to it. And so it's saying, what is EAFM? How do you understand it? How do you apply it? And how do you talk to your neighbors about it? One of the things we also try to do, and you'll see this in the toolkit, is important concepts like this will make posters, big size wall posters, we put up into the room. We have about 7 or 8 of these posters, these kind of key ideas, so people constantly see them when they walk in the room, and it allows us to engage them to say, well, what does fisheries management mean to you? What does the ecosystem approach mean to you? What does it mean to the people that you're working with? So these kind of key messages, we try to, again, emphasize through graphs, through posters, as part of the curriculum, just so, again, people walk away with a more common understanding. You know, EAFM can be thought of finding a balance between human well-being and ecological well-being through good governance. These are pretty novel concepts in some of the countries we're working with. We still challenge with the terms, but this is how, you know, we try to parse out and get people to think about what is ecological well-being? What does it mean to be human well-being? In some cases, they've never asked these questions because they weren't allowed to, weren't given the opportunity to. And governance is something that came from above. All of a sudden, they're empowered to do it. How do they do it? How do they think about it? And what does it mean for their stakeholders. EAFM, again, I talked a little bit about this. A lot of the questions we get are like, well, we try to do integrated coastal management. What is EAFM? Is that something totally new? Do I have to start over? No, you don't have to start over. You can take some of the things that you're practicing and move them into a new concept. Conventional fisheries management, again, a lot of these are, single species. They're attempting to manage trawl fisheries, which are multi-species, fisheries in a single species model. It doesn't work very well, especially in tropical countries like Southeast Asia. Principles of EAFM. Some nice fish. We try to, again, run this through the entire training, talking about the 7 principles, making sure you're hitting all of these ideas. Some of them, again, are new concepts for a lot of the people that are getting the training. They're new concepts to also teach, because remember, we're just not bringing 50 people in and saying, okay, Vietnam, you're done, go forth and apply EAFM. They're going to be doing training from the national level to the provincial level. They got 26 provinces, 26 times. They're going to do it to the commune level. Let's say 20 communes in a province. This is going to be brought down to the local level in order that everybody can have a similar conversation. And so these ideas of increasing participation, an adaptive management precautionary approach are pretty novel in many of the countries we work in. I'm just going to give you a very quick examples. Good governance includes the process, institutions, and arrangements that oversee the way rules, norms, and actions are structured. Scales. Ecological is how do you align with the ecological boundaries? Which issues for socioeconomic, which issues are important to solve? And which issues are related to fisheries? Again, we're dealing with fisheries agencies that may not have responsibility for many of the issues that people bring up. How do you bring that back to those issues that they can solve? Political governance, what is the mandate and temporal? With stakeholders, that's been one of the biggest challenges in working in Southeast Asia, is this idea of stakeholders. It's a new concept. It's also a challenging one, and we've created some curriculum to help them kind of prioritize. It leads to a lot of really interesting conversations, as it would here, but it also is trying to empower people to be able to say, well, we got to talk with everybody, but there are ways to address this. It's not as overwhelming as one thinks. This helps with kind of prioritizing the communication with those stakeholders. A lot of people, again, ask us, well, we're doing this, do we have to start over again? And the answer is no. We actually use this one as an activity. We kind of put this on the floor and we ask people to stand where they think they're doing. Southeast Asia, perhaps a little bit different. They like activities. We try to do a lot of things where people are standing up, putting timelines on the wall, communicating. This is an activity. We'll actually put a tape on the floor and ask people to move to different positions. I mentioned this is something that's new. Moving towards EAFM, case studies. What we've developed is we're working towards 21 case studies. We have 7 that are solidified now throughout the region on different scales. From a regional scale, maybe a sub-regional scale, 3 countries, or a bay that might be shared with Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia, to a local community, to inland versus aquaculture versus marine. And what we want to try to do is have this manual available so that the instructors, when they get to the point and they're saying, I think my students would benefit most from an example like this, that allows them the flexibility to pick out those different examples. I have one in the Philippines. Let me just jump through it. This is the Visayan region. You can see that the local government pretty much controls, most of the waters. So how do you manage a fishery where local government, which is empowered more than a regional government, manage such things. It's just a really good schematic, and let me zip through it. Oops. So each of the case studies looks exactly like the other, and we did that on purpose. We created an outline and asked people, individuals in those countries, to develop both case studies and an accompanying Word document that can be used by the trainers. Important background, got to know why we're talking about it. Management history, again, timeline, very important. A lot of countries learn by emulating others. They want to see that it was successful somewhere else before they put their foot forward and ask their leadership to support such a thing. They've been going at this for a while, like we all have. EAFM planning process, no EAFM planning process is finished until we have a group photo and karaoke. That's very important for Asia. This planning process in the Philippines actually took about 14 months. It's quite quick to get a plan. That is the plan. And I'll just, vision and goals, you can read those. They emulate what we try to do in our own plans as well. Clearly objective, sustainable livelihood. Buying out fishermen or fishers in Southeast Asia is not happening. It won't happen. There's too many of them. Something like 100 million people rely directly on fisheries in Southeast Asia for employment. Think about the coastlines. Think about where most of the fish that's imported in the US comes from. A lot of it comes from Southeast Asia, right? This is an important topic. It's politically sensitive. So you're not going to say, take out 30%. You've got to find ways to incorporate everybody into the conversation. Again, I'm using these just to demonstrate what that case study would look like. Each one of those that we have, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and a few others, look exactly like this. This is important. Why do we need EAFM, and how can EAFM help us solve the issue that we're trying to address? Oops. So as I mentioned, each case study has an accompanying Word document. That's kind of what it looks like in terms of an outline. It allows people to read it and say, yeah, that makes sense for me. It's also a manual that will eventually get online somewhere where people can just read case studies, and we hope people can add case studies. So we want to get to 21. I have 3 that I have to write. But we have a lot of great colleagues who can contribute. It's just getting the time. All right, got a couple more minutes. I will, management cycle, again, we work this through. We want people to think about that this process never ends. There are certain parts of it, like the startup, prepare for EAFM, you only do once. But stakeholder engagement, you keep doing. And so we emphasize that throughout the curriculum about which parts are done once, and kind of see why we have the startup there. It feeds in the reality checks, really important. The reality checks are there to say, are we meeting our goals? And you have to keep answering those questions, asking those questions, and hopefully getting answers. These are just slides again in the curriculum to show you kind of the level that we go through and why we need 300 slides and 5 to 6 days to get this through. Remember, if you're learning this too, and you're hearing it in English, and English isn't your first language, there's some real challenges. And so that's why language is very important. That's why we try to translate. We don't do that, but the country may decide to do that. And then we would, so for example, in Vietnam, I would be looking at an English slide deck in my hand, but on the screen, it would be Vietnamese, and we would have a translator. Slows things down a lot, but that's the best way to get these points across. Okay, and I just want to end up here. By the end of day 5, we have developed our EAFM plan. We have gone through all of these steps, somewhat laborious, and we bring it back around. And the idea is, again, to help people feel comfortable and confident that they understand what EAFM is. They can ask questions about how it's been applied in other cases. They can figure out in how to localize it for their country, and we encourage that. This is really a base presentation that we would expect to be localized. And in the case of the Philippines, they have a Philippine version of essential EAFM. They call it mainstreaming EAFM. It localizes it so that it's relevant. And that's what we want to do. We want to provide the resources to the people who may not have time to develop them themselves, to be able to say, okay, I got 300 slides, I'm going to go through this, I'm going to localize this, and I'm going to start to do my training. And indeed, that's what we have seen happen. Next steps. I do think we need to work on modules of catch documentation traceability, combating IUU, things that can be standalone and can be integrated into the conversation, because these are the questions people are asking. I hear about catch documentation traceability. What is it? And how does that fit into EAFM? This right here is our last workshop. We have a week where we're going to spend with CFDEC to talk about tools, decision support tools, and MPA. What is an MPA? What is it good for? When do you use it? Why do you use it? And management actions. That will be our last workshop under the PAPA, and then we'll sadly be done. We struggle a lot with monitoring and evaluation of indicators, assessment reports. Those are things that we probably need to bring in others to help us with. Inland EAFM has a training course. They're starting that now. It's a great course. We're also thinking, we've been asked to develop one on aquaculture. Very similar to what I just went through, but again, the examples would be more aquaculture focused. Why? Because aquaculture is really important in Southeast Asia. So we want to, again, empower those in the region to be able to do this kind of training, and we're giving them the tools to do that, we hope. The penultimate slide. So where is it being applied? Again, we talked about the Philippines. They actually have a law that requires fisheries management to be done by EAFM by next year. So all fisheries management in the Philippines has to be managed through an EAFM plan, both at a regional and a provincial level. Thailand, what you see CFDEC doing a lot is pilots. They'll take a community and they'll pilot EAFM, develop some champions, and then put on a roadshow. And I think that's a pretty good way to figure out how to localize something. But if it works, you also have champions who can say, look, my income went up. I started doing fish sauce now instead of throwing away the fish. You know, I've had extra income because I've learned how to do an ecosystem approach. You know, I now have stakeholders such as the Women's Cooperative, which was never a part of the conversation before. They now feel empowered to be helping us manage the blue crab. Cambodia, a couple of pilot sites. I think this one will be interesting. Tonle Sap, huge, huge lake, something like 120 kilometer long river that's attached to the lake. They want to do it, manage all of those fisheries through EAFM. So this is a lake that increases and decreases in size based on the rainy season. Fishermen are itinerant. It's a seasonal fishery. So they're really expanding and pushing the boundaries of how we imagined EAFM to be used. I think that's great. I hope we, in a couple of years, will get some good lessons from that. Vietnam, Myanmar, and Laos have EAFM pilot sites. And the training has been used in Ecuador and Peru, as well as Mexico, the Spanish version. And we've actually had people from Sudan come and visit CFDEC while we were there to learn about how to manage fisheries. They may have other issues to worry about in Sudan, but at least they're thinking about the fish. Okay, I made it. I skipped a lot of stuff, but essentially what I did skip is kind of the minutia of the curriculum. I was going to kind of dig down into some of the approaches that we take, but just to note again, why does it take 5 to 6 days? It takes that long because we do a lot of activities that require hours. We do a lot of mapping that requires hours. This is the way, it's a very visual way for people to learn. And that's one of the things that we've had to learn ourselves is, how do adults learn? You know, it's by engaging, by doing visual exercises. We do a lot of things which require people to line up and sit down and argue with each other and play games. Again, just trying to bring forth some of those ideas in EAFM that they can then take back, think about and take back to them. So thank you. And I just, a couple of names, that's mine on the first. Sebastian Velez in OLE handles the port state measure work, coordinates it for Office of Law Enforcement, and the NOS USAID PAPA team, Scott Frew, Gabrielle Johnson, and Jason Philibot over in NOS CRCP are the ones who interface with USAID on our PAPA. Thank you very much. And I guess we'll take questions for the last,
Great. We have
however long we have questions for.
Thank you, Michael. That's great.
Thank you.
It's great to be transported to Southeast Asia and see how it's being expanded there. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
We have folks online here, and so folks online, you can submit a question, and we'll pose that question to Michael. We have a number of folks here in the room, and if you could introduce yourself and pose a question, if you have one, to Michael, that'd be great.
And can we say that, I failed 508 compliance.
So no,
which I didn't know what it was until a couple days ago. So happy to share the presentation. Just perhaps
contact you.
Contact me. I'll just wait till there's a group and send it out. But also very much happy to delve into the curriculum and share. Probably would be helpful though, just for you guys to go on eafmlearn.org and play around and look at what's there and ask me questions after you kind of dig into that. It's a great tool. It's constantly updated. And any feedback and contributions are always warmly welcome to how to improve this for the next go round, should there be one.
And thanks to NOAA Library, who has been our host for this entire series. They archive this, so our recording will be up and available. But if you do want the presentation, contact Michael directly at that address. So I'll just turn it over to anyone. Ellen, introduce yourself and just tell us your question.
Hello, my name's Ellen Spooner. I'm the communications specialist for NOAA's Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Program. You mentioned that in some of the trainings you guys learned from the managers in the region and adapted, and given Southeast Asia's like centuries old history of fishing and having that being a huge part of their community, I was just wondering if you could share an example of something that you guys learned from them and how you adapted that and how we could maybe bring that back here. So it's like a two-way partnership.
Yeah. One of the things that we learned, for example, was in many cases, people couldn't identify their own stakeholders because they never had to think about it. There was a male-dominated culture in fishing, yet if you look at, I'll just pick blue swimming crab, most of the process after catching the crab is the picking and the processing, which is done by women. And so what we have tried to expand and use examples of is picking those examples, which include a very diverse set of the community. You know, where are women involved, for example? Making sure we highlight those examples for others to know that it's not just the activity of getting in a boat and going someplace. It's more inclusive than that. And those were examples that we actually, no one came to us and told us, but when we start to talk about stakeholders and we did the mapping exercise, you know, you just have a very basic understanding of like, well, we go fishing. Well, where do you go fishing? Over here. Well, who does this belong to? Well, you don't know. And so you started to have those conversations about, well, wouldn't you want to know if you're fishing somewhere, you know, who this area belongs to and have that communication and what happens after you catch it. So a lot of the kind of the development of the CFDEC version focused on those experiences that broadened the definition, perhaps the traditional definition of what fishing is. It's not just the activity, it's the pre and post activity. and inclusive of that to try to make sure that we are addressing a lot of the communities. And in some cases, in some fisheries, very different. In some of the fisheries, there is only that, I get in a boat, I fish, and it's done. The other thing that you'll find in, for example, like Vietnam, is every person that has a bathtub size of land is growing shrimp at some point. So you have a lot of inputs into the system that we didn't really think about from our perspective when we wrote this curriculum. You know, again, you kind of come up with, well, there's the shrimp. It's being processed. Well, what are those inputs? How do those people view? Are they part of the process itself? And in some cases, the example that we did in Vietnam to help them with stakeholders is we developed a questionnaire, and I went and I brought on people from the hotel, from the tourism industry, to actually be staged people. And we sent the Vietnamese out on the street, and the people were already on the street. And I said, go talk with that person. Well, that person was part of the plan. And so that kind of experience was not so much what people came back to us, but what we observed from our own trainings to say, well, that's kind of missing. And it wasn't a nefarious thing. It was just, in Vietnam's case, they took orders from the top and they never questioned them. Now all of a sudden they're in charge. So it was, you know, being very observant is one case. And in other cases, it was learning about inland fisheries. NOAA doesn't do inland fisheries. So hearing about how they manage a seasonally flooded plain for fisheries was something that we were able to bring back. And we've started to work with YAP and some in Micronesia to take this training and even bring it into the Pacific based on kind of our new sensitivity ourselves to different kinds of fisheries that NOAA may not be part of managing.
Okay, we have probably a few more minutes for about 2 questions. We have one online.
Okay.
So we'll go over there. Shannon Amiot, how do we get involved if we are interested in joining any of the on-the-ground teams? And I'm wondering whether that's just an email to you, Michael, to get more details about.
So I think that the short answer is because this 5-year agreement is ending, it's a bit of a challenge. However, we don't know what the next 5 years will. Will USAID come back to us and say, this has been great, we want to continue? And if that's the case, if they're part of there's an EBFM team, that's correct, right? The email. Yeah, once we know more of that, then that's just a communication to say, hey, we're going to be at this again. And these are the kind of people we need, you know, to help us do that. And whether that comes from me, if my office continues to permit me to do this, or it comes from the NOS team itself, but that communication will happen once we know what the next couple of years are. That being said, you know, if people take the training and they do it themselves anywhere, I would appreciate knowing getting feedback to say, hey, we gave the training in X country, this was great, this didn't work. Any suggestions for improvement would be valued.
Thank you. Anyone else here in the room? Yes. Can you introduce yourself and just question?
Sure. My name is Maddie Harris, and thanks, Michael, for that great presentation. It's nice to see such an awesome overview of all the work that this team has accomplished. I'm curious, you mentioned as one of the modules as a part of the training, kind of working on what it would be like to put some more time into something like monitoring and evaluation. And I'm curious from your perspective, not just specific to the training, but from your perspective and this team's perspective of implementing these trainings, what you were looking for in terms of metrics or goals, and how you would know that this project is being successful and how it's being implemented to meet your goals or AID's goals. Kind of curious, you know, how you think about that when clearly it's, you know, you are often several steps removed from the actual implementation when you're training the trainers.
Yeah, that's been a significant challenge. Capacity building is a leap of faith, right? You know, we know the problem existed, and that's kind of why we came up with this idea independently, these 3 groups. Fortunately, we had conversations where we were able to pull our expertise together. What is the metric? I think the metric is that for us, if we look at it, it's how quickly it has been absorbed, how many times CFTech is being asked to deliver this presentation. It's a significant cost. It's a couple $100,000 a year that CFDEC, the EAFM team, gets. These are requests that come from the countries themselves, and they keep coming. And so I look at that to say, this has been successful enough that the demand at the local, provincial, and national level is there, that the ministers are asking and contributing to supporting the expansion of EAFM. I think it's compared to the previous ICZM, and conventional fisheries management, this makes sense for the region. It finally addresses a typical tropical trawl, situation where trawlers are getting 12, 13, 14 different species at once. That's not how they've had experience in managing fisheries. So I think the demand, we look at that, we look and say there's demand even after all these years for training. USAID metrics are a challenge. They look at how many people you've trained. Well, I can train 10,000 people. Does it mean anything? Not really. But those are the simple metrics that don't mean something, but also don't mean anything. So we have to go by metrics and almost anecdotal. How many times are they being asked to train? They're training 2 weeks a year, 2 weeks a month, every month. This EAFM team is just 4 people who are going out and doing this. That shows that there's still strong demand. People from Sweden and Japan, countries Sweden and Japan, are contributing to this. That shows that there's people who thought about this and said, it's worth my money to provide CFDEC with additional funding to do EAFM training. And people are putting in time and effort to communicate back with us to say, hey, that was a great module, but man, can you work on this, that, and the other? And I think that's also an indicator that people are taking their time and effort to learn, apply, and then come back and say, that was great, but we need something else to complement this. It is a leap of faith, but over the last 7 years, with all the hundreds and thousands of hours that I and others have put into this, it seems to have paid off. The region itself, and well, I guess what is the other metric? The Philippines have passed a law that says you have to manage your fisheries by EAFM. That's pretty impressive. To get a law in place, we all know how difficult that is in the US. No easier in the Philippines. But there were champions. There were enough champions behind that who said, I get this, this works, this is good for Filipinos. That got it to a law, and now they're doing all this training to make sure that fisheries managers can actually meet the requirements of the law. And so you're having these thousands and thousands of people trained, which actually demand more. They say, okay, great, you got the theory, do something that's applied, do something that's inland, do something that's aquaculture. And so that's kind of how this has started, from something very small with just, we need to build some curriculum, to now multiple toolkits in multiple languages. And we have a great organization in CFDEC who is very busy doing the training.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That was wonderful, Michael, and I appreciate everyone joining us online and here in the room. But this concludes today's presentation. Again, thanks to everyone. Just a reminder, our next presentation will be April 8th, and that will be Dr. Heather Leslie from University of Maine joining us online. So we look forward to you folks joining us all next time. And again, thanks to the library, NOAA Library, who hosts us and also retains an archive of all these presentations. So thank you.